All right, everyone, we're right at 5 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. I think we still have a few stragglers coming in, but they'll manage. This talk is called When Metrics Lie, and it's all about building better metrics. So I'm Ryan Cooke. I'm a tech lead at Pinterest. I work on a cross-functional team called the Metric Quality and Test Tools team. We're a 6-person team with 2 engineers on each platform. And we work full-time to make sure that our metrics are right. And we build test tools, which you'll find out more about later. So to answer the question, when metrics lie, you make bad decisions. If we look at kind of the lean startup philosophy, which to some extent every startup follows, this is the idea that whenever you're building an app or building something, you come up with an idea. Say you have this idea to increase your user sign up. You build it out, then you measure, did it actually increase the user sign up? From that, you make the decisions. We're purely focused on that measure step. It's easy to do in a very, there's 100 tools, this graphics from somebody who does that. It's easy to get wrong as well. And if you measure this wrong, then suddenly you make the wrong decision in what actually made the improvements, and the whole cycle kind of goes off. So I'm talking about how we made it at Pinterest and how we focus to get these metrics right. So to give you a sense of where you are now, your metrics are wrong. Everyone's metrics are wrong. To give a real-world example of how this is very easy to happen, let's talk about daily active users. Daily active users, which is DAU, is often the most core metric to any company. Almost every company will report it. They share it. So when you have daily active users, you're building it. A product manager might just say, hit an endpoint when the user opens the app. That's what the technical engineer is told to do. Whenever it hits the endpoint, the user's logged as a daily active user. Now, when you're defining daily active user, you might not realize this, but you have to, in addition to defining active, which most apps define as any resemblance of activity on their site, maybe that's a good definition, maybe not. You also have to define what a day is, which seems like you know what a day is, but you have to say that UTC midnight is when a new day starts, or some kind of cutoff of a day. Now, the implication here is that some data engineer probably set this without even thinking about it for 10 minutes. Maybe not, maybe they did. But if you set a daily active user cutoff at midnight, what happens is if a user is active before and after midnight, so midnight, UTC midnight is actually 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. US time. So say you have an app where people are often signing up at the end of the day. They're signing up 5 p.m. right after work, something like that. If they are spending that whole time, say they're at their office, they're signing up, they're doing it, they count as active user for both the first day, 0 day and the first day they're using. You might see that the users on that platform appear to have better retention, while maybe your mobile users, they're more weekend or evening users. Because you're looking at just the cutoff is at midnight. The user used it before, or say 4 p.m. Western time. They used it before and after, and suddenly they count it as 2 active users. Suddenly, you might be making decisions off of that. To go back kind of to the example I had, to use the example I had used, you're using decisions that suddenly you're seeing these web users because web users are more active in the time. But the data people are interpreting that as the web users have better retention. They come back another day. So suddenly a PM saying that you should shove more, we should take advantage of the screen space, make everything small so we can have all these items on the home screen of the app. And they're just comparing, and they're getting these wrong decisions based on the decision to make it midnight, like kind of a subtle, quiet thing. And that's assuming that the engineers all implement it before. I mentioned in the spec that the idea is to hit the endpoint when the user opens the app. Say the iOS developer, they actually did it, and every time somebody changes screens, it hits it. While the Android developer, it's just whenever they open an app. Suddenly, the iOS developer is more likely to get this kind of 2-day occurrence than the Android app. And again, you'll see that maybe the Android app has has more user engagement per person, but it looks like the iOS app has more daily active users, and you're trying to figure out port one feature from another, when really it's just a time artifact. That's just kind of to give you the idea that You can easily get the wrong idea. You can make mistakes from that. But what kind of gets scary about this is that not only does this kind of change and hurt your thinking, and possibly you build projects off of a wrong decision or wrong data, but you don't know that you made the wrong decision, that they're never going to get a bug report that says, hey, I logged as 2 daily active users. That doesn't seem right. I was only on the app for 1 day. Never gotten that bug report. Maybe one day, but haven't got it yet. And because of that, you can spend tons of company time building the wrong thing. And that was a scenario that we could anticipate. That was something we thought about. To give a recent real-world example, Facebook Messenger. Apparently, you can use Pinterest as a plugin in Facebook Messenger. I'm not an active user of that, but that's an option. Facebook Messenger, without telling us, decided that they want to re-log in the users like every day in the background just to make sure that they don't have to go in through to keep the token stable. This, depending on how you build your daily active user trigger, might trigger it went through my code, it opened the app, and it logged that this user logged in. And suddenly, you're seeing a big spike in daily active users from unknown source web, depending on how you log it, because Facebook changed something. That happened. And like I said, you're never going to get the bug report. Again, there's not the Messenger user is like, I didn't open your app today. Why do I count as a daily active user? So to follow that up, your metrics are wrong. They're always going to be wrong. But it's OK to be wrong to some extent. There's a acceptable threshold. The goal of metrics is to be able to make good decisions. It's not to be 100% accurate. I have a scenario that, say somebody really loves your app, but they're kind of done with the smartphone life. So they're using your app, playing on it one last time, then they turn off the internet, they throw their app in the river. There's no way you're getting those metrics. I mean, maybe if you had a team of scuba divers, I could see Facebook doing to get the targeted ads, but for the most part, those metrics are just gone. Those ad dollars, they saw an ad, but we didn't get the logging money for it. And it's OK to be wrong to that extent. That's one user will manage. You just need to be able to make good decisions. So at Pinterest, what we created was a certification process. Essentially, we found that there are very key metrics that are important to Pinterest and making good decisions at Pinterest. And we want to make these metrics as accurate as possible. So we made this process to prove to ourselves and keep these metrics accurate. That's what I'm in depth going to be talking about. Specifically, in pin impression certification, this is the first one we did. We did it about a year ago from today. I believe it's been pretty successful. Before I go into that, I feel like I need to take a chance to talk about Pinterest. Tech employees aren't our core demographic per se. I know that 99% of you are daily active users. You're probably on Pinterest on your phone right now. And there's one person out there who probably isn't super familiar with how Pinterest works. And so for that one person, I'd like to explain a little bit. The simple goal of Pinterest is we help people discover and do what they love. The idea that it's less of a social network, it's more of find something that improves your life. We want you to actually take these ideas offline and make your life a little bit better from it. I gave a real snapshot of my home feed to give some examples of this. So if we look at just some examples, I'm always looking for beautiful vacations. I've saved a few ideas, so this looks like an awesome suggestion. And what it does is it's looking at kind of what I've done, what I've saved, what I've looked into. It's recommending it, and then I might save it. This one might seem goofy, but I actually have my lights synchronized to my video games, so having lights synchronized to my TV show sounds pretty cool to me. I just convinced my team to do an offsite to a VR arcade, so it's a pretty good recommendation. Love bouldering. You can see these kind of become targeted. They save. And a pin impression is when one of these is visible, where both it's a core level of engagement for Pinterest, and that if somebody is seeing these pins, they're using Pinterest in a meaningful way. And we also bill ads off of it. And we also all the smart, if our machine learning team changes what's served, people seeing more pin impressions is a sign that it works. So it's very, very core to how we think. Admittedly, I have no idea what these two are about. Sometimes machine learning sucks. But that's how it goes. The other side of that is that we're a pretty big app. We have 250 million monthly active users. That number's constantly growing. Any problem that we have can result in hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost revenue pretty quickly, lots of embarrassment, lots of trust with our partners. So being at this scale, we care about having the accuracy a lot. So I'm going to just go through the product spec, not the product spec, the certification spec one step at a time. The first kind of process to the product spec to the certification is the product spec. The product spec is when we actually take the PMs, everyone in, to define what is a metric going to look like. So the first thing is they actually have to define it. They have to tell us that, so for pin impressions, it has to be visible for at least 1 second, or it doesn't count. It has to be a certain amount visible on the screen. What is even a pin impression? It's a representation of a pin that a user can take action on. These definitions become really important when other platforms are saying, I added this new picture, it's an image of a pin, should it count? And we're like, if you can't save it, if you can't take action, then no, it doesn't. It gives us a definition to iterate on as the company grows and as things change. And what we found in kind of our earlier examples, and when we audited a lot of these metrics, is every platform would often implement these things in just slightly different ways. Like one platform would wait for an image to load while another wouldn't. And this results in just the metrics being different. We're measuring different things in different platforms. So getting the definition right, and related to that, we consider the edge cases. We write out that what if somebody closes the app? What if an app rotates? Or one of our common edge cases with impressions is basically you scroll up, you scroll down, something that causes you to see the same impression twice. We don't think that should count as 2 impressions. It doesn't seem like a meaningful engagement. But we write out that if somebody sees as 2 impressions, it logs only as 1. And then we figure out how we're going to do that later on. We also sanity check these definitions. What this means is we try to think about both kind of the edge case of the midnight for the daily active users I've done, but other wrong ideas we can get off of it. So if we look at pin impressions, one of the ways it could go wrong is that it's just measuring if this view is on the screen. It doesn't give a definition of how large it should be. So if you want to improve pin impressions, you could make pins really, really small. And to a company, that would look like a really great improvement. Any test would say like, wow, users love it. Engagement's way up on the pin impressions. We've also had to stop people who accidentally reloaded the feed, and they wanted to really ship that because they saw people seeing more pin impressions. But it's like, yeah, I could blink new pins to the person every second, but that's nothing. That's a deception that you're lying. And just understanding where the definition can be misused is helpful in avoiding those cases. As we build everything, we talk a lot to our stakeholders. For pin impressions, we have a lot of machine learning stakeholders. These are people that are actually serving them. They care about how it goes, but also the ad teams, they actually bill people off of it. And this comes up to be very important to do early on. What we found is that from client engineers' perspective, we might find it more accurate to log it with 2 events, maybe one at the start and one at the end. But the machine learning pipeline might have learned 1,000 generations of machine learning on the old version, and they can't change the events. So just making sure that we are creating something that the stakeholders can use, that they need, is important before we do any coding. And related to that is understanding what matters. So a good example, again, going for pin impressions, is that we actually found we have well over 40 surfaces that have pin impressions, but about 3 of them account for 90% of the pin impressions. So we really got to make sure those 3 are accurate. We also have a few kind of like, somebody could hit our API, I think Trunk Club, for example, they hit our API and they show pins on it. We, for the most part, don't care about this. It's not enough volume to move any metrics, but understanding that allows us to focus and devote time where we can put the most efforts in avoiding any metric problems. So then we go into 3 pipelines. These are done simultaneously. It's worth noting I'm a client engineer, and a lot of my talk is biased from client engineer, specifically Android work. But a data team and data embed is very important for this project to be successful. So what the data team does is they write up how the backend pipeline should be. So for example, in the impressions one, they have a dedupe, and they say, here's how we determine if it's the same impression, just logged twice. They also do things like this acceptance criteria, which becomes a algorithmic sanity check. So it does something along the lines of, the start time should never be after the end time. If you ever log an impression where the start time is after the end time, set an alert, tell whatever platform's doing that there's something wrong. There's other better ones than that that I probably wrote down, but I'm completely blanking on. One of the ones we've seen is an impression should never log without a surface. So if an impression doesn't have a surface that's happening on, we get an alert. We say somebody implemented something wrong is hitting this event even though it shouldn't be. Then with this, they actually work with the client team. This is the 3rd step, the data analysis and validation. So they say, we found that 2% of pins on iOS are not logging with a surface. The iOS engineers say that's crazy, that's impossible. And they say, well, here's a user, here's how it happened, here's the screen that's most often. Maybe they say it was a deep link or something edge case. Eventually, the engineer on client side will hunt it down, they'll figure out what happened, and then we'll run the data analysis on the fixed version. These teams work together to kind of get this metric to a correct state. After we've done it, they've kind of said, okay, the data matches our level. They create these as reactive alerts that last kind of forever. So it's a little bit of the, like, if suddenly a surface ever shows up that's not logging, we'll get an alert right away. It means the problem's in production, so this is not our ideal way of catching something. But they also do alerts for month over month, day over day. So for example, if our impression numbers are different from what we expected, we will get an alert and we will investigate. Do this with caution. Every single holiday, we get an alert that says, so we have a lot more users on weekends and non-work days than we do that. So every time that people have Monday off, we get an alert saying, wow, a lot of activity. This looks super suspicious. And it's easy if it's some like Veterans Day. Every once in a while, we have to be like, holidays in Brazil. Learn on it. But we can, this actually kind of alerting is how we found the messenger problem, that we were getting a suspicious amount of web traffic, and it alerted that the surface was wrong, and it came not from a test, but from an alerting. After that, we get to the client side of it. This is making the app write itself. What we do this, we take a few steps. We do what we call the current state audit, which is we go through the app screen by screen. This is kind of sometimes done in parallel working with a QA person, and just actually see what's happening and see if it's correct. We found that it helps to create visual tools for this. So for example, for impressions, we made a tool where an engineer can see a highlight on the impression if it's visible, and even get a little notice saying, yep, that ended. This just makes it easier to debug because they're not going to see the impressions aren't logging correctly normally using the app. You can also kind of look at the data as it comes in, but being able to look at the logging as it happens for engineers, even if they're making a new feature, becomes a very quick sanity check to say, this looks wrong, this looks right. And normally in the current state audits, we do find problems. We'll create tickets. We'll either have the team that something happens where a new team created a new surface that works just completely different than the existing ones. And we'll tell them, here's kind of the differences, or we'll fix them ourselves. After that, we make a technical spec. This is something that when we first did it, I thought was ridiculous. We brought up a Google Doc, and kind of we write it in Google Doc. As an engineer, like documenting in Google Doc makes me a little terrified. Like I want to have this code that's self-documenting. But we found it's actually really useful. It's more about cross-platform communication. So the iOS, the Android, the web engineers will say, like, here is how we're flushing, here is how we're deduping, and then I'll say, wait a minute, the server is supposed to be deduping? Why is iOS deduping on client side? And having this all in one space allows the clients to be more consistent. We've also found that it helps when somebody else is coming to work with the code. Especially, we've recently been working with third-party auditors to further validate that everything's right. And they really love to have the here's where the code actually does it. Like I already mentioned, we do the fixes. We do that often working with the data team if it's a database fix. And then we'll create docs. A lot of the docs focus on where we think this can go wrong and kind of recertification focus. So we realized, for example, on Pinterest, after we did this process last year, we launched a platform called AMP. For those who aren't web engineers, AMPs are when you get that little lightning thing on a Google result, and it loads a completely different code base, so it can't use any of our web code. And what we do in the recertification is we just say, if a new platform shows up, it's not certified, we don't know it's trusted, that is kind of the things you should look out for as they come up with. Ideally, we certify them as they happen. The third core direction is testing. This is what keeps our metrics the most accurate. We've had this talk, there was a talk earlier today on performance. It's the exact same thing. At small companies, fixing things and not having that many engineers normally works. At a large company, we have on the Android app something around 30 engineers committing to it every day. This goes for performance, this goes for build times. If you don't have something that's alerting if it gets worse, it's just going to get worse. And it's the same for metrics. It's not that code developers are bad, it's just that there's a lot of surface, there's a lot of things. So we build tests to make sure that doesn't get worse, regression tests. These are built primarily as UI tests, and we defined the tests for coverage and stability. This goes back to understanding if this screen is wrong, it's going to have the biggest impact. And also, UI tests are nightmarish to maintain. It's actually my next step. UI tests are hard. So have few. Have small good ones and focus on getting them right. There's a lot of kind of tricks to getting it right. My recommendation is to write one integration test and have that be able to run in a blocking manner and be able to run on commits stably. Because then once you build up all the pipelines, you can add more as you get there. But getting the first one right, I think, is the most step. Briefly, just because we are Android, I can talk about how we do the UI test at Android. We use Firebase Test Lab. We complement it with a tool called Flank, which was originally from Walmart. I think now it's maintained by a very responsive developer named Matthew Edwards, who's very open to people helping and contributing. But Firebase Test Lab is essentially, it has a bunch of emulators on the cloud that we can set. And then Flank allows us to send the test in parallel. So instead of having 200 something around there tests, that run at one at a time, we instead spin up 200 emulators, and the tests all finish in the time that it takes the slowest test to finish. That allows us to get the results much faster and take advantage of Firebase Test Lab setup. It's kind of related to UI testing is hard. It's one of those things that doesn't come across well in talks. People are always talking about it, but getting stable UI tests, don't go into that expecting it's going to work. You can run it 100 times on your machine and it will stay stable, but somebody might change something. It's just hard to prevent flake. So I just want to give that as a warning. Metric testing, a lot of our metric testing is built off of UI testing. That said, don't feel like you have to use UI testing. If you can unit test, say you want to unit test if it logs the background state or the app version correctly. There's some things you can unit test meaningfully, but the majority of our testing is UI testing. And then another sanity check. This is run the tests, put a regression in to make sure they actually will catch the problem. Make sure that they are doing what they are doing consistently across platforms and kind of a synchronization of that. The last step is the comms. This is telling everybody at the company, we're logging 100 things. We're logging way more than 100 things. But this event is the one that we can really trust. If you can, often there's, from a data engineer's point of view, there's a lot of ways they can answer a question. So we say, look at this metric. This is the one that you should rely on if you can to answer any of the questions. From that, we actually, in a lot of our UI tools, will mark this as a certified metric so you can use that And that allows them to kind of use the certified metric and get the right decisions, hopefully. So obvious question after you've done all that is, does it work? Does it actually add value to keeping the metrics accurate? I cherry-picked October's data set. So in October, on Android alone, we caught 5 regressions. I like to think maybe there's some change that the stats have gotten. People know these tests are going to catch problems, so they're more willing to make some changes. But these regressions are like, you catch it and you revert it or you fix the problem and it's not a big deal. So we catch them, it doesn't go to release. We tell the developer, hey, this looks like a problem, we're done, and they find the problem. But one of these was going to mess up the logging time on the impressions, which if that was out for a day would have cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars. Another one could be more subtle. Like we would catch that one right away because it's like, why are we not making $100,000 today? But another one could subtly cause the undercount it by restarting the impressions. It did called the whole set, so it would restart it, and that made it less threshold. So it would do a 5% undercount. That's the kind of bug that could be in your code base forever because you're never going to get the report for it. So we've been pretty happy with the regressions caught. That said, there still is a lot of noise to the setup. We spend a lot of time chasing down alerts for things that a screen changed or something. And that's just a balance and a maintenance cost that you're going to have to figure out at some point. As an added bonus, we also caught 3 functionality regressions in the last month. That was, it's not really built for this, but if it tries to run the test and it says, hey, the app crashed, that's not logging the correct metrics. That does the trick. We also measure ourselves against a metric we call a metric quality score. This is essentially what we defined is there's what actually happened and what was logged, and the further away from it, the worse it is. So kind of the inspiration for this project you can see happened up here, where at the very beginning, we logged it. See, in one case, we logged iOS impressions 21% higher than what actually happened. Now that I'd say around here is where we get the stabilization process. The last big issue we saw was actually a Chrome browser version, Chrome browser 0.67. I gotta shame the Chrome team here. They messed up the implementation of a tool called Interception Observer, which tells you if a view is on screen. So 1 in 20 times it wouldn't trigger correctly, and we didn't know that a view was on screen. And we didn't have tests running on that specific version of Chrome, so we didn't catch it for a little bit. But you can see that was a 0.1, 0.2% regression overall. I mean, 1 or 2%. It's much more stable now that we've had these tests, and we've found that we're catching them faster, we're catching them before production. When I was practicing this talk took a whole lot more time, so we'll have lots of time for questions, but we're already on last thoughts. I feel like I've been emphasizing this some, but there's a lot of overhead, there's a lot of maintenance to keeping your metrics right. If you're a small team, use this with some caution. Make sure that you're not signing up for a 1-week project and your metrics are right forever. Pinterest is a big company, so we can afford to have a full-time metric quality team. I don't know if lots of companies can. I used to work at a 30-person company. They would not have. It's okay to have less verified metrics. We're trying to get as correct as possible, but sometimes you need to just learn something quickly. You need to know, does anybody use this feature at all? And you can get a general idea without having to do a full certification. Database metrics are going to be more accurate than client metrics. So what I'm talking about here is these are all events that whenever somebody does it, the client says this event happened, and the server responds, OK. A database metric would be, say, a user signed up. Then they have a user object in your database. And you can count how many user objects are in your database to know at least how many signups you've had. For users, you might want to know how active they are and stuff like that. But these metrics, you'll actually get a bug report if they go wrong. Somebody will say, I signed up and my account doesn't work. So use that when possible, especially when you're a small company. And similar kind of with the lean startup and the data-driven idea, a lot of companies have the idea of measure as many things as possible. I would urge to define a few things that are very, very important. Get those things right. Have a very clear definition for those few things. That allows you to kind of think more clearly as a company in general. The last tip I generally have is try to remove bad metrics. So a lot of times it's very easy for a client engineer to add this event happened. They did it just at the end of, one day a PM told them, I want to know this happened. They didn't do any verification. They're not going to use it anymore. But people are terrified to remove metric events because you don't know who's using them. You don't know the data processing team. And we've been looking at having potentially expiring metrics or like date timestamps for when these are added. The idea is that if you know something is logging wrong, just stop logging it. It might break a pipeline, but that pipeline was working wrong. So removing bad metrics will help your code quality in general. That's all I got. I have a Twitter account. I'm told that you're supposed to add these to these. I'm not good at Twitter. It's 2 underscores, and you'll probably only see me liking random video game stuff. But we're open to questions. Go ahead.
So how do you deal with filter out?
Sure. So the question was, how do we deal with A/B test kind of experimenting? And this is actually a great question. It was a very hard problem for us. So at Pinterest, we have probably close to 100 A/B tests in the client app at any time. No, I'm being told that's too low. OK. We're going to say close to 100 optimistically in the client at the app at any time. So having it that there's 100 different, there's not 100 different users. There's 2 to 100 different scenarios that the app can be in, given any different combination of A/B tests. Testing that means that we can't test every single combination of tests. So what we do is we approach it with 2 kind of general directions. We have what we call the default pinner experience. And this basically says these are experiments that look like they're going to ship. They're close to being shipped. They're 50% or higher. And that's what the test runs on, what looks like the average user gets. And then whenever somebody on the back end changes an experiment, ramps up an experiment, it actually will kick off the test suite with both groups of the experiment. And beyond that, everything else sets the default pinner experience. It's a good question.
How long does the process take from start to finish to, let's say somebody has an ID for a new metric, actually getting it across the line?
It definitely depends on the metric. Certification, the PIN certification was a multiple month process. PINs are very complicated in that there's so many ways they can be displayed. There's so many different ideas. We did other metrics. So for example, one of them we did was I'm trying to think of a good one. The search metric, basically, what are the searches that are taking? That one is very simple. There's only one place you can search. Comparatively, it took a couple weeks, maybe about a month. So it depends, but it's substantial time.
You mentioned there was a difference between client-side deduping and back-end deduping.
Sure. So this was specific to the pin impression example. When we actually first started auditing it, the web team, they were trying to not send the same, so they had a list of pins you've seen, and they were trying not to send that pin event again. But as a company, we decided that it just makes more sense to let the server figure out if it's the same session as pin. So from that, we removed all the client code to they send it every time an impression happens. And then the server decides if that is something they've already seen. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Did you find that more useful for things like Android where you have font creates configuration?
Yeah, I think kind of making the clients just as simple and as dumb as possible and pushing as much logic to the server, and especially for the deduping case, they're able to handle it fine on the server, and we don't have to try to not send an event, which becomes dangerous.
How wide is your device, browser, and operating system coverage?
For metrics, it's very narrow, actually. We found that especially on kind of Android, the API level and different devices rarely affects the metric events themselves. So we actually test it on a low resolution emulator just because that runs much faster at a specific API level. We do have other tests. Specifically, we have like a monkey runner that does kind of the spread of API. And from that Chrome bug, we found that maybe we should expand our browser coverage, but right now it emphasizes just the most popular one.
At some point you said your iOS metrics, for example, were 20% off, reporting 20% more impressions than they actually were. How do you know what they actually were if your metrics were wrong?
It's a good question. So I don't know that specific case, but there's a few kind of ideas of how we measure what is accurate. Whenever we make a fix, so say, for example, one of the platforms, they start logging before an image had loaded, even though like if you're looking at a placeholder image, that shouldn't count as an impression. So we made that fix, and then we actually rolled it out in an A/B experiment. And then from the A/B experiment, we could see that it reduced our impressions by 2%. So to that extent, we could tell this was the impact of it. That 21% seems like we probably wouldn't have done too much at A/B. Sometimes there's a data artifact we can find as well and be like, this was the same ID or something like that. But mostly A/B test.
Can you elaborate on why UI tests are better for validating metrics than the unit testing?
Mostly we found it hard to write meaningful unit tests. If you can write good unit tests, I would appreciate some tips. But the metrics, they kind of interact very full system. They involve the UI. So for example, the pin impression, it's this item going above this view that triggers it to start. And having so much of the Android system there, we had trouble writing unit tests that would catch the core problem. We did write as many unit tests as we can because they're way more stable, but we had to have kind of UI tests to catch the full kind of integration possibilities.
Do you see a preference between like actually logging the metric on like the UI layer versus say a more logical layer like the view model?
It depends on the metric. Some of those you're going to have to get a callback from the Android system or something like that. But I mean, a lot of them you are. But as much of the UI component as you can take out of it, feel free to. Just metric dependent. I haven't been repeating like any of these questions, so sorry live streamers or video people.
When y'all were building this, did you have to account for like device connectivity? So like, was there any sort of like deferred setup if the device was offline when you tried to make like the logins in the back end? Like, that API?
Yeah, so the question was, did we account for device connectivity when building this? For the most part, we don't. We actually test against our real APIs, and Firebase Test Lab is really stable at staying online, with the exception that we do have tests that are testing the logging framework itself. So saying that if your network is off, can we still send those metrics to the clients? And we do actually test and built out some infrastructure where we'll write it to the database and wait till you come online to send the events.
The logging framework, is that something you built in-house then, or is this like something off the shelf that is like a
This is something built in-house. So.
What was the reason?
Happened years before I joined the company. If I had to guess, I would say that, and this question was, did we build something ourselves or use something off the shelf like Kissmetrics? I believe the reason that I think most companies at our scale do is that Kissmetrics and similar tools don't allow you to parse the data in the kind of degree that you really need to for us. We especially also, we kind of double use our data in a lot of ways, so that an event might go to make decisions from business people, but it might also go into machine learning pipelines, and then we have to get it to machine learning and make the machine learning people make good decisions. Any other questions? Last call. All right, thanks everyone. Glad you made it out.